This podcast is brought to you by Visiam LLC on subjects of interest to human resource professionals and independent consultants, as well as organizational leadership.
Welcome to this podcast. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'll be talking to a good friend, Steve Imke, who I've known for 25 years. Steve and I met at SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, which is within the budget of the Small Business Administration. We've stayed in touch over those years, since that initial introduction years ago, as we counseled entrepreneurs or people going into business. But Steve, if you wouldn't mind, for the audience, could you give us a brief background on your journey, your business journey?
I sure can. Thank you, Harold, for having me here on your inaugural podcast here. And I always have considered you a mentor of mine. I know my dad gave me an ultimatum when I was at the end of my high school career and told me I had two options in life. One was to go into the armed services or to go to college. I was not a very studious person, to be honest with you. And so I chose to join the Coast Guard, which I did. I got an electronics background. After a 5-year stint, I was actually recruited by a computer company that I used to work for in high school. I became a course developer for them. I spent roughly the next decade working up their corporate ladder from being a course developer to being an educational consultant, unit manager, cost center manager, site manager. But they, being a mini computer company, were falling on hard times. And my flow up through the corporation was basically the result of downsizing of my superiors, to be quite honest with you. And it became very clear to me that the option to stay there would just culminate in me being told to turn off the lights someday. And I decided it was time to learn a little bit about business. I became an invisible fencing dealer, which I did for about 5 years, which was great because I actually learned a lot about marketing and sales. Being both a cost center manager and a site manager, working for a mini computer company, provided me with a bunch of financial acumen. When the time was right, I submitted my resignation and started my own documentation and training company, which is the division that I managed for this company. I spent the next several years building that up, opening up several offices in other cities. I happened to open up one in the Boston area. There was a company, a publicly held company in that area that saw our business and contacted me and asked me if I was ever in a position to be acquired. And we had always built the company to be acquired. I said, sure. It was a very fast type of a process. 30 days later, they had acquired me, hired me as a vice president of operations for their services arm, which I managed for the next roughly 2 years. And we built that business up through not only my business as the backbone, but through an acquisition of 2 other companies that we folded into the entity. Unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I would say that company was acquired by another company during the .com era who was interested primarily in their technical business, not their service business. And I got a call that said, you got 30 days to shut the business down. I contacted their board and said, what if I could make the problem go away? And I said, would you pay me for it? And they said, sure. So I reacquired my company and one of the other 2 companies. And I sat there and I parted out all the customers. I gave actually many of my crappy customers to my competitors who choked on them and was able to reacquire them. Make a long story short, I then had my company back with another company that I acquired. Of course, it wasn't the .com era. Everybody was concerned about revenue, not so much about profit. My partner and I, we spent the next several years, working on making the company profitable. Then the company was sold again to a private investor, essentially, who wanted to a lifestyle change, moving out from California, wanted to run the business. I was in my early 40s at this point. I had just built and sold 2 multi-million-dollar companies. I really didn't need to work for money anymore. But what I really realized was I really had desire to be a business coach. And at that point, this is roughly over 20 years ago, that's when I got involved with SCORE, and I got involved with the Small Business Development Center and with the local community college here as an entrepreneurship director, teaching people. And I've been doing it ever since. So I absolutely love helping and assisting fledgling entrepreneurs start, grow, and even sell their businesses.
So retirement was never a consideration for you?
I am retired. You can see actually on the corner here, my wife bought me a license plate that said retired. Of course, I won't put that on my vehicles, but anyway, it's retirement, I suppose. But if you love what you do and it's a hobby, if that makes any sense. I mean, I love doing it. I would do it every day if I could,
It's a lifestyle,
which I
it's a
do.
passion for you.
It's a lifestyle. Right.
I can relate to that. After my corporate career, I had a period of time where I said, okay, what do I want to do? And I want to have impact. And there's a couple passions that we'll discuss later. But when you talk to an entrepreneur, what are they asking for? What do they need?
Well, that's two parts of the question. What are they asking for and what do they need? Typically, the thing that is always top of mind for them are compliance issues. What entity they want to choose? How do I create a business plan so I can use it to raise money? Do I need licenses and permits? What about sales tax? What about income tax? One of the things that I often share with many of my clients is a story that comes out of Google called The Monkey on the Pedestal. And Google, the head of Google's innovation department, called all of his engineers in and he said, listen, if our job is to teach a monkey to sing while standing on a pedestal, we should not spend any time building the pedestal because the hard part is actually teaching the monkey to sing. And so most of those things that they ask me, all right, in that example are pedestals. And so I try to tell them, listen, the hard part is teaching the monkey to sing. And so to that respect, what I teach them primarily is ways to mitigate the risk or reduce the risk of their business idea. I often share what they call the blue ocean strategy, or what effectively is trying to find a niche market or an uncontested market within your particular industry. So I spend a lot of time helping them developing business models that are slightly different than others in their particular market space. We talk a lot about marketing. It's surprising, even the existing companies that come to me and they say, Steve, I'm just not getting any traction. And the first thing I do is I look to see if they have a Google review and they profile and don't. I mean, these are some really basic kind of market stuff. Many of them have really failed to understand market research, and they don't even understand who their target customers are, or what channels are the most effective. And we have so many tools that are available for free through even our local library that these entrepreneurs need to be able to look at. They can really refine a big part of that message. Sales is another big part, to be honest with you. But most people they come from the technical world and they just don't have much in the way of sales experience, and they think sales is sleazy. I always think of sales as, if I have something that can benefit your business, I want to share that with you. I don't think you can call that sales, but I don't see that as being sleazy at all. And I think the last big element, quite frankly, that I speak to them about is the funding plan, because what funding options you have available is really based on where you are in your journey. So, for example, early stage funding, this is, research and those kinds of things. They don't take a whole lot of money, but those are best, bootstrapping, those kinds of things. You don't need a lot of money coming in. And the problem is they want money right up front, which is very expensive in that regard because the business doesn't have the revenues to support it. And so effectively with risk comes reward, right? And so that reward turns out to be, if it's debt, higher interest rates from private investors, because let's face it, banks don't loan money to startups, or having to give away huge amounts of equity in your firm. So the idea, for me, is to help them understand there's an early stage where you should be bootstrapping and doing it on your own. Maybe now you get into pre-revenue, but you have now proved that people are willing to exchange money for your business idea. Maybe that's the first time that you might think about bringing in some type of an investor. And then, of course, when you're actually, producing revenue and you have cash flow at that point, then other options open the door for debt financing. And quite frankly, most of the clients have that completely upside down. So those are the teaching the monkey to sing component parts, rather than they tend to be much more interested in building that pedestal, because it's very easy to create an entity and pat yourself on the back and say, listen, I created a business today. But it's not a business unless I can start selling, in my mind, to somebody I've never had a relationship with and they've actually bought what I have. That's the mark that I say you actually have a business, not when you file your entity with the Secretary of State.
A lot of times is convincing people to take counsel. Your interpersonal skills, your interaction with these entrepreneurs, these business people, how do they react to counsel? Did the student learn or did the teacher teach? What have you learned related to offering counsel and giving them good advice and influencing their mindset, their perspective?
One of the first things that I talk to every new client about is the Dunning-Kruger curve. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but basically if it's an axis, so on the bottom of the axis, the x-axis is your competence in being able to do something versus the vertical axis or the y-axis is essentially your confidence. So confidence and, you know, your ability to actually do the work, your competence. And so what happens is when they have low competence, they generally run right to the top of being very confident. I call that being on the top of Mount Stupid. And I bring it to their attention. I say, we're having a conversation because in all likelihood, you're on the top of Mount Stupid right now. And then what happens is after they have a counsel with me, I bring them right down to the valley of despair because I teach them about all the things that they didn't know beforehand. All right. And then my job, once I've gone through that cycle, is to then work on the what I call the slope of enlightenment, because by that time they've realized what they don't know. And it was best explained to me, to be honest with you. I think this is a great metaphor. I use this in most of my classes. If your entire knowledge of a subject, we'll call it business, was the size of a lemon, the rind around the lemon is the boundary for which you realize the information that you don't know. But when I can fill that lemon to the size of a basketball, right? The actual outside of that basketball now, the surface area is so much larger than it was when it was a lemon. And now you have more knowledge, but what you realize now is how much you really don't know, which then that's the part that brings them down to the valley of despair. And then that's where we sit down and say, okay, now that we've gotten through that, just like any kind of boot camp scenario, we break you down so we can build you back up in the right way. Then they become, capable of listening. Some people, quite frankly, they're just not ready. They're looking for that instant pill that would help them lose weight type of thing. That instant pill, give me one little nugget of information and I'll be able to run with it. And when they realize just how big it is, that, many of them, they just go right through the bottom, through the valley of despair. They don't even stop. They just keep going. I never see them ever again, which is fine because quite frankly, they were probably didn't have the cut of their jib wasn't going to allow them to be a successful entrepreneur anyway. I consider that a success as much as I see those people who are anxiously attempting to pull themselves out of that curve and saying, okay, I realize now that I don't know everything and it's a lot more complicated. Please tell me where I need to go. Here's what my problems are. Help me understand. Is this the right problem or is there something that I'm missing entirely?
Well, interesting to me because you've interacted with thousands of businesses and entrepreneurs starting a business. And that as a resource for your personal education. Every engagement encounter you have with a business owner, you learn something yourself. So, what is your perspectives? What has changed since you left your businesses and started the counseling? Define your growth curve. What have you learned over those years?
I've learned quite a bit. I'll be honest, the first decade that I was a counselor, for the most part, I stayed engaged. I still had businesses, so I could at least talk about my relative experiences. Because even when I sold that last employer-based businesses, I mean, I have an oil and gas company, but it's a non-employer business. Essentially, my wife and I are the only members of that, and it's a training product that we sell. Similarly, we've done real estate types of things whereby I'm the only person. Everybody else are freelancers or something. And most of the time, it's using money to develop these particular projects. I'm not raising a hammer and building a spec home or something like that. I'm hiring other people to do that for me. But quite frankly, during the first decade, I pretty much didn't I spent a little bit of time researching as it was related to my particular business. I would report that. But I would say about a decade ago, I began to document the responses to each one of these clients that had a question. And over the last decade, I've amassed nearly 1,500 posts. And I started a blog at that point, and I started to just record those incidences. Here's the problem. Here's the solution. And to that, now, as any learning model goes, problem is presented by a client. Maybe I have the answer immediately. Maybe I don't. Maybe I've got to do some research based upon my overall depth of general business knowledge. Then I research that, draft that, write that, publish it. Then now I've gone through this process of learning more about it and documenting it, which now when I have even a question for myself, what did I say about that? I can now go back and occasionally read some of those. And because I've improved my knowledge over time, I'll go back and I'll rewrite old blog posts with adding new information. So for me, it's been a constant learning experience. And what makes it quite unique, quite frankly, is the fact that most people who run a business, even when I ran my business, I really didn't have a lot of time to read current events or read what was going on even in my industry. I would generally stay maybe a half a day a month to doing kinds of research, but it was always a tug on my time to take care of the immediate problems. I don't have that problem. I mean, I'm not working for money. I get to do this essentially every day, all the time. So it's not like most of the businesses I have, they run on autopilot, which allows me to spend 8-10 hours a day doing research, writing blog posts, answering client questions, doing all of those kinds of things, which I've done essentially for free for most of my clients for, almost 20 years now, to be honest with you. And that's a learning curve as we've gone through there. That creates a very unique perspective.
Well, it's a passion you have, and the choice your father gave you years ago. Do you want to go out and have something fed to you through a university system, a curriculum, etc.? You have taken the education process and basically made it part of your soul. You are a consummate learner. I know for a fact that you read more books in a week than I do in a year. Quite possibly I talk to more people than you do. Than, but that is my way of growing is listening to other entrepreneurs such as yourself. So, thank you for your background and your insight there. And by the way, I'll let everybody have your contact information. I'll put it on the podcast here toward the end of the video, so we can continue to connect people that are on those learning curves as we all are.
Absolutely. So Harold, what is your passion here? What is your reason for starting this podcast?
There's two reasons. One, I believe that business leadership is in a constant need for good counsel. And if they're running an organization, they've got about 3% of their time able to pursue alternatives to the status quo of their business. They are in a constant need to be challenged diplomatically, but to be aware of the trends, what's changing, what's happening in their organization, how their culture has developed or deteriorated over time, what competition is doing, to be honest, what technology is doing that underpins their business. But there's no better resource for that insight than counselors such as yourself and the consultants that are out there in the marketplace. What you really magnify and spotlight is that consultants in the marketplace have the beauty of engaging with multiple organizations. They have learned so much from every encounter that they've experienced that they can bring to bear on a new relationship, a new consulting relationship. So, one, I want to make these podcasts available to business owners as triggers, as tipping points where they say, I didn't think of that. But I also want to give visibility to the independent consultant that is a specialist in one area. Okay. Now, I know in the consultant world that I've talked to, their number one issue is visibility. They need to be visible. They need to make rain. They have value and they need to be able to really connect with clients that have those specific needs where they are the specialist, where they are the expert, where they can deliver a turnkey solution or give them counsel. The other area that I'm well aware of, just from my corporate career, is that so many times an organization has tremendous insight and value within the organization, but they cannot pull it out because a lot of people with that insight are invisible to leadership. People that have ideas have been smothered by the hierarchy of the organization. And as one CEO told me, he said, Harold, by the time things are filtered from the front lines by levels of management, I'm operating with 5% of the facts. I do not see what's going on, and I need an outside voice to come in, really bring those voices to the table in a consolidated, concise way that I can say, wow, we need to make some changes. So as I move forward, I'm looking for consultants in the marketplace that have a specific skill and value that they want to bring visibility to, they want to publicize, they want to be connected to a marketplace. I can do that. I can make those connections. So, I hope I answered your question. But you and I are in the same place in life. We are in a giving rather than a taking mindset. And we see great joy in connecting value to need. And that's what I'm about. Any follow-up questions from you?
That's great because, quite frankly, somebody mentioned to me one time. They said, they mentioned the concept of living your dash, right? The concept being, you have a born date and a death date, and what did you do during that dash period? And this is a passion to live that dash and to leave the world a better place for having done that. I would also add one other thing here. When it comes to consultants, I see two different kinds. One are what I would call myself as more of a floodlight. So in other words, it's a light. But it's spread over a very vast number of topics. And then you have consultants who are spotlights, who are experts in marketing or sales or supply chain or whatever it may be. They're specialists in those particular areas. So they shine a much brighter light on a very small topic. But sometimes we need to be grounded with the idea of a floodlight so we can actually see where the dark spots are and which ones we need to focus the spotlight on.
Well, and interesting you say that because from a peripheral vision standpoint, I have a broad light. I see the spectrum, but I am focused on two areas. And one is organizational culture. And many podcasts in the future will relate to an organization's culture and leadership's impact and how to impact that culture, because culture really is a key element of performance. If you have the right culture, performance seems to just follow right behind it. The other aspect is rainmaking. And literally for consultants that need to make rain in their business, that is my spotlight. So interesting how you brought those to bear. Well, I'd like to bring this to a close and thank our audience for joining us, and specifically Steve Imke for joining us today and offering your insight on what you've learned over the years in a consulting and counseling role. I will put your contact information on the screen for our audience to enable them to contact you directly and start conversations offline. That would be of value to both parties here. So, Steve, if you're open for it, I'd like to bring you back because we'll be having some panel discussions on specific issues. But I'd also like you to possibly react to some of our consultants that have that spotlight that you can maybe offer insight or expand upon the message that they have brought.
I would love to, and thanks again for having me here.
Talk to you soon, Steve.
Thank you. And join us on future podcasts that will focus on subjects of interest to human resource professionals and organizational leadership. We are interested in interviewing HR professionals on future podcasts, so please reach out and make an appointment on Harold's calendar. Visiam LLC is a provider of organizational and leadership assessments, and you can learn more about us at visiam.com and connect with us on LinkedIn.